Today's story is Paralyzed Mafia boss hired a chaotic female caregiver, but what happened next will make you cry. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before today's story begins, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support gives us the opportunity to keep creating meaningful and emotional stories for you. We are truly grateful that you chose to spend your time here today. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's begin today's story. Sometimes, the person everyone calls a disaster is the only one brave enough to walk into someone else's silence. Isaiah Brooks had fired 27 caregivers in just 18 months. The 28th stood outside the iron gates of Brooks Manor carrying a faded blue backpack, a coffee she had already spilled on herself, and absolutely no intention of pretending to be perfect. The security guards exchanged confused glances as Ariana Mitchell hurried toward the entrance, her curly hair escaping its loose bun while she apologized to no one in particular. "Sorry, I'm late." She checked her cracked wristwatch. "Actually, I'm only 3 minutes late. That's practically early in Chicago traffic." Neither guard smiled. No one smiled at Brooks Manor. The estate rose above Lake Michigan like a fortress carved from polished black stone. Massive windows reflected the gray morning sky. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway with military precision. Armed bodyguards stood motionless beneath marble columns, their tailored suits hiding the weapons everyone knew they carried. Every corner of the mansion whispered the same warning. Do not make mistakes. Do not ask questions. And whatever you do, do not disturb Isaiah Brooks. Years ago, his name alone had been enough to stop gang wars before they started. Entire criminal organizations disappeared after challenging him. Politicians feared him. Rivals respected him. Newspapers called him the Ghost King of Chicago because nobody ever saw him lose. Until one rainy October night. A sniper's bullet had shattered his spine during an assassination attempt outside a charity gala. He survived. His empire survived. But the man who once controlled every room he entered had not stood on his own feet since. The mansion became quieter after that. Friends visited less often. Business meetings moved elsewhere. Even laughter seemed forbidden inside these walls. Caregivers came. Caregivers left. Some couldn't handle Isaiah's explosive temper. Others quit after enduring endless silence. One lasted exactly 4 hours before walking out in tears. The household staff had stopped learning their names. As Ariana reached the front doors, the head butler, Malcolm Reed, greeted her with an expression usually reserved for funeral directors. "You are Miss Mitchell?" She smiled brightly. "I hope so. Otherwise, I've been answering to the wrong name for 28 years. Malcolm blinked once. No reaction. Mr. Brooks expects professionalism. I do too. He does not appreciate unnecessary conversation. I'll try to keep my fascinating life stories under control. Still nothing. He opened the towering oak doors. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold stone exterior. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished mahogany floors. Oil paintings watched silently from the walls. Expensive clocks ticked with perfect rhythm, as though even time itself obeyed Isaiah Brooks. Several staff members glanced toward Ariana. One maid quietly whispered to another, "She won't survive lunch." Another shook his head. "She talks too much." Ariana heard every word. She simply smiled. People had underestimated her for as long as she could remember. Too cheerful, too loud, too clumsy, too ordinary. They never stayed long enough to discover the reason she refused to stop smiling. Malcolm stopped before an enormous pair of dark wooden doors. Behind them, the most feared man in Chicago waited. Malcolm lowered his voice. "There are rules. I'm listening. You speak only when spoken to." She nodded. "You never touch Mr. Brooks without permission." Another nod. "And if he tells you to leave." Ariana adjusted the backpack slipping from her shoulder before quietly finishing his sentence. "I should probably leave. For your own safety." She took one slow breath. Then, without realizing it, she smiled again. "If he plans to fire me today." Malcolm frowned. Could he at least wait until after lunch? For the first time that morning, even the old butler had no idea whether this young woman was unbelievably foolish, or exactly the miracle this silent mansion had been waiting for. The heavy doors opened without a sound. Isaiah Brooks sat beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen waters of Lake Michigan, his wheelchair angled toward the gray horizon. Morning light spilled across the room, tracing sharp lines over expensive walnut shelves, leather-bound books, and polished marble that looked untouched by ordinary life. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The room felt less like a bedroom and more like a museum preserving the memory of a man who no longer existed. Isaiah didn't turn around. He already knew another caregiver had arrived. Number 28. The previous one had lasted 6 hours. The one before that hadn't survived breakfast. I said I don't need anyone. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made armed men hesitate. Malcolm cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks. Miss Ariana Mitchell. Silence. Several seconds passed before Isaiah finally spoke again. Leave. Malcolm lowered his eyes. Sir, your physician insists. I wasn't speaking to you. The old butler nodded respectfully before stepping backward. The enormous doors slowly closed. Now only 2 people remained inside the room. One had once ruled Chicago with fear. The other still had coffee stains on her sleeve. Ariana studied him quietly. He looked younger than the newspaper photographs she'd seen. 41, perhaps. Broad shoulders, dark skin, close-cropped hair beginning to show silver near the temples. His hands rested motionless on the wheelchair arms. Strong hands. Hands that looked built to command, not surrender. She noticed something else. No family photographs. No flowers. No personal decorations. Only perfectly arranged furniture that felt painfully empty. You know? Her voice broke the silence so naturally it almost sounded out of place. This room needs color. Isaiah's eyes slowly shifted toward her. Cold. Unreadable. You've been here 20 seconds. I know. And you're already criticizing my house. I'm complimenting your architecture. She looked around again. But if I stay any longer, I might accidentally commit interior decorating. For a moment, nothing happened. Isaiah simply stared at her as if trying to decide whether she was incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I've fired 27 caregivers. I heard. They all believe they could fix me. I don't. His eyebrows moved almost imperceptibly. You don't. Ariana shook her head. I don't think people are broken because they stop walking. The room became still again. I think people become broken when they stop hoping. Isaiah looked away toward the lake. Hope. He hated that word. Doctors used it. Therapists sold it. Family members whispered it before they stopped visiting altogether. Hope was simply another expensive treatment that never worked. You'll learn. His voice became quieter. Everyone eventually leaves. Ariana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly walked toward the massive bookshelf lining one wall. Photographs were hidden between several old biographies. Not displayed. Hidden. She noticed one frame lying face down. Without touching it, she simply looked. Dust had gathered around everything. Except that frame. Someone still picked it up. Someone still couldn't bear to look at it for long. Interesting. You like investigating? Isaiah asked without turning. I like paying attention. There is a difference. There is. She smiled softly. And that's why I noticed your window hasn't been opened in months. His eyes narrowed. The air smells like grief. The words escaped before she realized she'd spoken them aloud. Even she froze. Malcolm, standing outside the doors, nearly closed his eyes. This was it. No one talked to Isaiah Brooks that way. Inside the room, only silence remained. Long uncomfortable. Then Isaiah slowly pressed a button on his wheelchair. The electric motors hummed quietly as he turned toward Ariana for the first time. His dark eyes met hers completely. No anger. No shouting. Only exhaustion buried beneath years of carefully controlled indifference. You should leave. Now. His voice carried no threat. Only certainty. You've just said the one thing nobody else was foolish enough to say. Ariana held his gaze. My father used to lock every window after my mother died. Isaiah said nothing. He thought if fresh air came inside. Her smile faded for the first time that morning. It would carry away the last memories of her. A faint breeze rattled the bare tree branches outside. My father wasn't protecting memories. She looked toward the frozen lake beyond the glass. He was protecting his pain. The words settled between them like falling snow. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Somewhere deep inside himself. For the first time since the bullet had stolen the life he once knew, Isaiah Brooks felt something even more dangerous than anger. He felt someone had quietly seen straight through the walls he had spent 2 years building around his heart. The first battle inside Brooks Manor was not between Isaiah Brooks and Ariana Mitchell. It was between Ariana and everyone else. By the time she stepped out of Isaiah's room, the mansion already seemed to know she had somehow survived. Housekeepers paused their polishing. Bodyguards glanced up from their security monitors. Even the chefs inside the enormous kitchen lowered their voices. Nobody expected to see her walking out with the same smile she had worn walking in. "You're still here?" one of the younger maids whispered. "I think so." Ariana looked down at herself dramatically. "I haven't disappeared yet." The maid couldn't help smiling. It lasted less than a second before the head housekeeper shot her a warning glance. No unnecessary friendliness. That had become another unspoken rule of Brooks Manor. The staff had worked there long enough to understand something outsiders never did. The mansion reflected its owner. Since Isaiah had stopped smiling, so had everyone else. Malcolm escorted Ariana through a long hallway lined with black and white photographs from another lifetime. There was Isaiah shaking hands with governors, Isaiah opening hospitals, Isaiah surrounded by children during charity events. None of the photographs showed weapons. None revealed the dangerous empire hidden beneath polished suits and generous donations. Power rarely introduced itself honestly. "You've been reading about him." Malcolm noticed her lingering gaze. "A little. And I expected someone colder." Malcolm considered that answer carefully. "You've met him for exactly 7 minutes." "I know. And yet." She glanced back toward the closed bedroom doors. "I don't think anger is what keeps him alive." The old butler remained silent. She continued walking. "I think loneliness does." Malcolm said nothing, but for the first time that morning, he wondered whether the young woman noticed far more than she admitted. They arrived at the caregiver's suite. Unlike the rest of the mansion, the room was surprisingly modest. A small bedroom, a writing desk, one bookshelf, a single window overlooking the gardens. No luxury, only function. The previous caregiver left most of her belongings. Malcolm opened the closet. Several neatly folded uniforms still hung inside. One pair of comfortable shoes remained beneath the bed, almost as though someone had intended to return, but never did. She quit. Malcolm nodded. Without notice. What happened? He made her feel invisible. The words lingered. Not cruel, simply true. After Malcolm left, Ariana unpacked her backpack. There wasn't much. A few books. A framed photograph of an older black couple smiling beneath a maple tree. A worn notebook. Several colorful pens. And one faded music player. She placed the photograph on the desk with gentle care. "My favorite people." She whispered the words to the empty room. Her father had spent the final 3 years of his life unable to move without assistance. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. The disease had stolen his strength little by little, but it had never stolen his kindness. Every morning, even when breathing exhausted him, he would smile at his daughter and say the exact same sentence. "Never let someone's pain convince you they deserve less love." She had carried those words into every difficult day since his passing. A sudden knock interrupted her thoughts. One of the younger kitchen assistants stood nervously outside holding a tray. "Mr. Reed asked me to bring your lunch." Ariana thanked him warmly. Before he left, she noticed bruises along his wrist. Fresh bruises. What happened? The young man instinctively hit his arm. "Nothing. It doesn't look like nothing. I dropped a serving cart." His answer came too quickly, too perfectly. He hurried away before she could ask another question. Ariana watched him disappear down the hallway. Interesting. Fear lived everywhere inside this house, not just inside Isaiah's room. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the mansion's vast library. Towering shelves reached toward the ceiling. Rare first editions filled the walls. Dust floated lazily through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight. She smiled. This place desperately needs music. Without thinking, she quietly hummed an old gospel hymn her mother used to sing while cleaning their tiny apartment. The melody drifted through the silent mansion like a forgotten memory. Upstairs, inside his bedroom, Isaiah Brooks stopped reading the report lying unopened on his lap. His eyes slowly lifted toward the ceiling. He hadn't heard anyone sing inside Brooks Manor in more than 2 years, and against every instinct telling him to shut the sound out, he found himself listening until the final note faded into silence. The next morning, Isaiah Brooks decided he had seen enough. Most caregivers failed because they became frightened. The stubborn ones failed because they became offended. He wondered which kind Ariana Mitchell would be. The answer, he assumed, would arrive before sunset. At precisely 8 o'clock, She entered his room carrying a breakfast tray balanced with surprising confidence. "Good morning." Isaiah didn't answer. She placed the tray on the table beside him. Oatmeal, fresh fruit, coffee. She looked at the plate. And toast that's trying very hard not to become charcoal. Silence. She waited. Nothing. "You know," she continued casually, "I've heard conversations where brick walls contributed more." Still nothing. Isaiah kept staring through the enormous window, as if she had never entered the room. Most people would have accepted defeat. Ariana simply pulled open the curtains another few inches. More sunlight poured inside. "I didn't ask for that." His voice cut through the room like cold steel. "No." She straightened the curtain. "You didn't. I prefer them closed." "I noticed." She walked back toward him. "And I respectfully disagree." His eyes slowly found hers. "You disagree?" "I do. This is my house." "It is." "My room." "Also true." "My windows." She nodded thoughtfully. "Absolutely." A brief pause. "But the sun wasn't asking your permission." The room fell silent. Outside the door, Malcolm nearly sighed. She had done it again. Every sentence sounded as though she were inviting disaster. Isaiah reached toward the control panel on his wheelchair. "Leave." "No." The word escaped her so naturally that she surprised herself. Isaiah stared. "What did you say?" "I said no." "Nobody. Not employees. Not business partners. Not rivals." Nobody told Isaiah Brooks no. Yet the young caregiver simply folded her hands behind her back. "You hired me to help take care of you. I hired you because my attorney wouldn't stop calling. Either way," she smiled gently, "I'm still doing my job. My job today is convincing you to eat breakfast before your coffee gets cold." Isaiah looked away again. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon." "I said I'm not hungry." "You also said you wanted the curtains closed." She glanced toward the bright window. So far, we're both ignoring each other. Against all reason. The corner of Malcolm's mouth twitched. The old butler quickly hid it. Isaiah noticed. That irritated him even more. "You find this amusing?" "No, sir." "You almost smiled." "I assure you." Malcolm lowered his head. It was an involuntary facial movement. Ariana bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. Isaiah noticed that too. Enough. Without warning, he swept his arm across the breakfast tray. The plate crashed against the marble floor. Coffee splashed across the expensive rug. Glass shattered into dozens of glittering pieces. The sound echoed through the mansion. Several guards instinctively reached for their radios. Nobody inside Brooks Manor moved after that. Everyone waited for the same outcome. Another caregiver. Another resignation. Ariana looked at the mess for several seconds. Then she quietly walked to the storage cabinet. She returned carrying a towel. Without a single complaint. She knelt and began cleaning the broken glass. Isaiah watched her carefully. "You should be angry." She kept wiping the spilled coffee from the floor. "I've been angry before. And it never cleaned anything." Her answer arrived almost as softly as the cloth sliding across polished marble. "You don't understand." Isaiah's voice grew heavier. "I wanted you to quit." "I know. You still can." "I know. You'd probably find a better job." "I probably could." She carefully picked up the last broken piece of porcelain. Then she looked up at him. "But I don't leave people on their worst days." The sentence landed with unexpected weight. Isaiah felt it before he could stop himself. For one impossible second, the room reminded him of a hospital years ago. His wife sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, refusing to leave after doctors had warned her recovery would take months. The memory vanished as quickly as it appeared. He hardened his expression again. "You'll regret staying." Ariana stood, carrying the broken dishes toward the kitchen. She paused at the doorway without turning around. "My father used to say something." Isaiah remained silent. He believed pain always tells people to push love away. Her voice was calm, but he also believed. She looked back with the same quiet smile she had worn on her first morning. That's exactly when love should sit down and stay a little longer. The room became still once more. Isaiah said nothing. But after she disappeared into the hallway, he glanced at the untouched bowl of oatmeal still resting on the serving cart. Then, almost against his own will, he reached for the spoon. Rain arrived just before sunset. The sky darkened over Lake Michigan until the mansion seemed to disappear into sheets of silver water. Thunder rolled across the horizon, low and distant, echoing through the empty halls of Brooks Manor. Most of the staff hurried to finish their work before the storm intensified. Ariana wandered through the west corridor carrying a basket of freshly folded blankets. She still didn't know every room. She wasn't sure anyone ever could. The mansion felt like a city built for one lonely man. As she passed an open doorway, she noticed a faint glow coming from inside. No voices, no television, only a single lamp. Curiosity slowed her steps. The room was unlike the rest of the house. It wasn't grand. It wasn't intimidating. It felt lived in. Shelves filled with old novels. A record player covered in dust. A baby grand piano. Fresh flowers that had long since dried inside a crystal vase. And on the mantel, photographs. Dozens of them. Isaiah laughing beside a beautiful black woman with warm brown eyes. Isaiah dancing at what looked like a charity gala. Isaiah sitting on a park bench, holding her hand while both of them laughed at something outside the frame. The man in those photographs barely resembled the one living upstairs. There was light in his eyes. Life. Hope. Ariana carefully set the basket down. She never touched the photographs. She simply stood there, silently honoring a happiness that no longer existed. Behind her, a quiet mechanical hum broke the silence. Isaiah. His wheelchair stopped just outside the doorway. I told them to keep this room locked. His voice carried neither anger nor surprise. Only fatigue. Ariana turned slowly. I'm sorry. You came in anyway. The door was open. He looked toward the photographs. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ariana whispered. She had a beautiful smile. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Her name was Naomi. It was the first personal thing he had voluntarily shared with anyone in years. Ariana didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded, allowing the name to settle into the quiet room. She made this place feel smaller, Isaiah said, almost to himself. It used to feel like a home. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Ariana noticed an old vinyl record still resting on the player. Dust covered everything. Except that record. Someone still held it. Someone still couldn't bear to play it. Did she like music? Isaiah gave the smallest nod. Every evening. His eyes never left the record player. She said every house deserved 1 hour where nobody argued. A faint smile almost appeared. She usually won. The smile vanished before it fully existed. Ariana walked toward the piano instead, not touching it, only looking. My mother believed something similar. Isaiah remained silent. She used to say grief hates music. That finally drew his attention. Why? Because music reminds grief that life is still moving. Another long silence filled the room. Isaiah's gaze drifted toward the photograph nearest the window. I haven't played her favorite record since the funeral. You don't have to. I can't. His answer was barely audible. The confession hung in the air with a weight heavier than thunder. Ariana understood then. This wasn't a man refusing to remember. This was a man terrified that remembering would hurt less one day. And somehow, that frightened him even more. Without another word, she walked toward the door. She would not force comfort where trust had not yet been invited. Just before leaving, she paused. You know, Isaiah didn't look at her. You don't always have to talk to someone who's gone. She glanced gently toward Naomi's photograph. Sometimes, her voice softened into little more than a whisper. It's enough to sit beside the love they left behind. She quietly closed the door. Isaiah remained alone. The rain continued outside. Minutes passed. Then, for the first time in more than 2 years, he reached toward the old record player. His hand stopped only inches away. Unable to make himself press play. Healing rarely announces itself with miracles. More often, it arrives disguised as small interruptions to old habits. 3 mornings after the rainstorm, Isaiah expected another session with the physical therapist. He hated those sessions. The exercises reminded him of everything he had lost. Every failed movement felt like another funeral. Instead, Ariana entered the room carrying a deck of playing cards. Isaiah frowned immediately. What is that? A highly sophisticated rehabilitation device. He looked at the cards. You mean a children's game? I prefer the term emotionally advanced entertainment. She shuffled the deck with exaggerated seriousness. The rules are simple. I'm not interested. I know. She sat across from him anyway. So I brought enough interest for both of us. Isaiah closed the book resting on his lap. You don't listen very well. Oh, I listen. She smiled. I just don't always obey. Malcolm, standing quietly near the doorway, lowered his eyes to hide another reluctant smile. Isaiah noticed everything, especially that. You seem determined to make everyone laugh. No. Ariana gently placed the cards on the table. I'm determined to remind everyone they still can. The sentence lingered. No one spoke. Outside, sunlight warmed the gardens for the first time in nearly a week. Ariana dealt two hands. If you win. Isaiah sighed. I'm not playing. If you win, she continued as though he had spoken in complete agreement. I'll spend an entire day without making jokes. He looked at her. And if I lose? You'll spend 10 minutes outside. He almost laughed. Almost. I already spend time outside. You spend time looking through windows. She nodded toward the garden. I'm talking about real sunshine. His expression hardened again. I'm not interested in being stared at. There it was. Not pride. Not anger. Fear. Ariana finally understood why he refused the gardens. People remembered the powerful man who once walked through every room with effortless confidence. He couldn't bear becoming the man everyone pitied. Before she could answer, a burst of barking echoed through the hallway. One of the estate's security guards hurried past the open door, chasing a muddy golden retriever puppy that had somehow slipped through the front gates. The puppy darted into Isaiah's room before anyone could stop it, straight toward the wheelchair. Oh no, the guard muttered. I'm so sorry, sir. The puppy ignored everyone. It dropped a chewed tennis ball beside Isaiah's footrest. Then it sat down, tail wagging furiously. Waiting. Isaiah stared. The puppy barked once. Softly. Patiently. You've got to be kidding me, he murmured. The dog nudged the tennis ball closer. Ariana folded her arms. I think you've been challenged. I'm not throwing that. The puppy barked. Again. Longer this time. Several staff members had quietly gathered in the hallway. Nobody dared enter. Nobody dared interrupt. For nearly 2 years, they had watched Isaiah reject visitors, doctors, friends. Yet this muddy little stranger seemed completely unimpressed by his reputation. Isaiah looked at the hopeful brown eyes staring back at him. Then, with a sigh that sounded suspiciously like surrender, he bent forward. Slowly, carefully, his fingers reached the tennis ball. He tossed it only a few feet across the room. The puppy exploded after it with unstoppable joy. A loud laugh escaped one of the younger maids before she quickly covered her mouth. Everyone froze, including Isaiah. He hadn't realized what had just happened. Neither had anyone else. For the first time since the assassination, he had leaned farther forward than any therapist had convinced him to attempt. Not because someone demanded it, because a puppy had believed he could. The guard finally collected the excited dog, apologizing repeatedly before disappearing down the hallway. Silence returned. But something invisible had changed. Ariana looked toward Isaiah without saying a word. She didn't congratulate him. She didn't point out the progress. She simply smiled the same quiet smile. Because real victories never needed applause. Isaiah glanced toward the doorway where the puppy had disappeared, then back at the tennis ball still lying on the floor. And for the first time in years, he found himself wondering whether healing could begin without feeling like a battle. Change has a strange way of unsettling people who benefit from things staying the same. By the second week of Ariana Mitchell's arrival, Brooks Manor no longer felt frozen. The curtains remained open. Fresh flowers appeared in empty hallways. Soft jazz drifted through the library each afternoon. Some of the staff even found themselves speaking above whispers again. Not because Isaiah Brooks had suddenly become cheerful, but because the silence no longer ruled every room. Not everyone welcomed the change. Late one evening, Ariana carried a stack of medical files toward Isaiah's study after Malcolm asked her to return them to the locked cabinet. The mansion was unusually quiet. Rain clouds gathered once again beyond the windows, turning the hallways into rivers of long shadows. As she approached the study, she heard voices. The door wasn't fully closed. She had no intention of listening. Then she heard Isaiah's name. She froze. He still signs whatever I put in front of him. The voice was unfamiliar. Smooth. Confident. Another man chuckled quietly. He doesn't even read the reports anymore. He trusts old habits. Ariana slowly stepped closer without making a sound. Through the narrow opening, she saw 2 men in expensive suits standing beside Isaiah's massive desk. One of them she recognized immediately. Victor Hayes, Isaiah's chief financial advisor. The same man who greeted visitors with polished manners and perfect smiles. Victor poured himself a drink. The rehabilitation is becoming a problem. His companion frowned. You think he'll recover? Victor shrugged. He doesn't need to recover. He only needs to start asking questions. Silence. Then Victor smiled. And I prefer sleeping peacefully. Ariana felt her heartbeat quicken. What about the caregiver? The second man asked. Victor laughed softly. She won't last. They never do. What if she does? Victor's smile disappeared. Then we'll make sure she doesn't. The room became quiet again. Ariana instinctively stepped backward. Her shoe brushed against an antique umbrella stand. A tiny metallic sound echoed down the hallway. Inside the study, the conversation stopped instantly. Who's there? Victor walked toward the door. Ariana reacted without thinking. She ducked into the nearest service corridor just as the study door swung open. Victor stepped outside. He looked both directions. Nothing. Only silence. After several tense seconds, he returned inside. Ariana waited motionless until the voices faded again. Only then did she finally breathe. Her hands trembled around the medical files. This wasn't ordinary office politics. Someone close to Isaiah wanted him weak, wanted him dependent, wanted him isolated. The realization sent a chill through her. Later that night, she found Malcolm locking the library. Can I ask you something? The old butler studied her expression. You've seen something. She hesitated. Does Isaiah trust Victor Hayes? Malcolm answered almost immediately. With everything. The business. Yes. The estate. Yes. His medical finances? Malcolm nodded again. He has managed them since before the shooting. Ariana looked toward the dark staircase leading upstairs. And before Naomi died, a shadow crossed Malcolm's face. She never trusted him. Those 5 words landed harder than anything she had overheard. Did she ever say why? Malcolm remained silent for several moments. Finally he spoke. Mrs. Brooks believed character reveals itself when someone has nothing to gain. And Victor? He was always helpful. The old butler looked toward the study. Only when someone important was watching. Ariana's thoughts raced. Pieces that had seemed unrelated suddenly began fitting together. The frightened kitchen assistant. The atmosphere of fear. The financial advisor who preferred Isaiah powerless. None of it felt accidental anymore. Upstairs, a light switched on inside Isaiah's bedroom. He was awake, completely unaware that the greatest threat inside Brooks Manor was not the paralysis keeping him in a wheelchair, but the man standing beside him every single day. Ariana tightened her grip on the files. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she realized she wasn't simply helping a wounded man heal. She might be the only person left who could protect him before someone else's quiet betrayal destroyed everything Naomi had once tried so desperately to preserve. The hardest truths are rarely discovered. They are invited into the light by ordinary acts of kindness. The following afternoon, Ariana stood in Isaiah's office organizing the growing stack of paperwork he had ignored for months. Bills, charity requests, medical reports, investment summaries. Everything arrived on Isaiah's desk. Almost nothing left it with his attention. She wasn't reading confidential information. She was simply arranging documents into neat piles when one envelope caught her eye. It wasn't the letter itself. It was the signature. Naomi Brooks. The envelope had never been opened. Dust covered one corner. She gently turned it over. Written beneath Isaiah's name, in elegant handwriting, were 4 simple words. For when you're ready. Ariana quietly placed it beside his chair. Nothing more. When Isaiah entered minutes later, he immediately noticed the envelope. His expression changed. Who touched this? I moved it. You shouldn't have. I know. She lowered her eyes respectfully. But I thought maybe. She nodded toward the handwriting. She wanted you to find it. Isaiah stared at the envelope as though it had appeared from another lifetime. His fingers hovered above it. Then withdrew. I can't. You don't have to today. Silence settled between them. At that moment, Victor Hayes entered without knocking. His smile arrived before he did. Isaiah. He stopped when he noticed Ariana standing nearby. I didn't realize we were interrupting. You weren't, Isaiah replied quietly. Victor placed several folders on the desk. I only need a few signatures. His movements were polished, confident, practiced. He opened the first folder and slid it toward Isaiah. The renewal contracts. Isaiah reached for the pen. Then, unexpectedly, Ariana spoke. Would you like me to organize those first? Victor looked at her politely. That won't be necessary. She smiled kindly. I'm sure it won't take long. Victor's smile remained. Only his eyes changed. They're routine documents. Ariana nodded. I'm certain they are. She looked toward Isaiah. Still, her voice stayed gentle. You've been working so hard in therapy. I think taking an extra minute to read something before signing it is another form of strength. The room became still. Victor laughed lightly. She's very dedicated. Isaiah didn't answer. Instead, he closed the pen. I'll read them later. Victor's smile finally faltered. They're time-sensitive. They can wait until tomorrow. A long silence followed. For the first time in years, someone had interrupted Victor's routine. Not with accusations. Not with confrontation. Simply by encouraging Isaiah to think for himself. Victor gathered the folders with measured calm. Tomorrow, then. He walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he looked directly at Ariana. The smile returned. It no longer reached his eyes. When the door closed, Isaiah remained unusually quiet. You don't trust him. It wasn't a question. Ariana chose her words carefully. I don't know him well enough. But I trust people who welcome questions. She looked toward the closed door. I've noticed Mr. Hayes prefers quick signatures. Isaiah leaned back slowly. No one has questioned Victor in years. Maybe everyone assumed someone else already had. Her answer lingered. Isaiah picked up Naomi's unopened envelope again. This time, his thumb slipped beneath the seal. The paper opened with a soft tear. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. A pressed white lily fell gently onto the desk. Isaiah closed his eyes. His hands trembled. He hadn't expected that flower. It had been Naomi's favorite. Ariana quietly stepped toward the door. This moment didn't belong to her. Before leaving, she heard Isaiah unfold the letter. Then, something she had never heard before. A broken breath. Not from physical pain. From grief finally allowing itself to speak. She softly closed the door behind her. Inside the office, Isaiah began reading words written by the woman he had loved most. Outside the office, Ariana looked down the long hallway. At the far end, Victor Hayes stood perfectly still in the shadows. He hadn't left. He had been watching the entire time. And when their eyes met across the silent corridor, Ariana realized she was no longer dealing with a polite financial advisor. She was standing face to face with a man who had just lost the one advantage he had counted on for years. Truth has a quiet way of arriving. It does not pound on locked doors. It waits until someone finally finds the courage to open them. The next morning, Isaiah Brooks asked for every financial record from the past 3 years. The request traveled through Brooks Manor faster than any rumor. Victor Hayes arrived within 20 minutes. His smile remained perfectly composed. There must be some misunderstanding. Isaiah looked up from Naomi's letter resting on his desk. I've spent too many years. Misunderstanding. Victor placed both hands calmly on the chair opposite him. Isaiah, you're recovering. This isn't the time to burden yourself with paperwork. No. Isaiah's voice was steady. It's exactly the time. For the first time since the shooting, the old authority returned. Not louder, simply clearer. Malcolm quietly entered carrying several archive boxes. Bank records, investment reports, charitable foundation accounts. Everything Victor believed would never be examined again. Hour after hour, the documents unfolded a painful story. Money redirected through shell companies. Donations that never reached children's hospitals. Property quietly transferred under temporary corporations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just thousands of tiny betrayals hidden inside ordinary paperwork. By late afternoon, the evidence could no longer hide behind polished words. Victor finally stopped pretending. You wouldn't even be alive without me. His voice lost every trace of warmth. I kept your empire standing. You kept yourself rich. Isaiah's answer was almost a whisper. Victor laughed bitterly, while you sat upstairs drowning in grief. Silence. Then Isaiah surprised everyone. I did. He looked toward Ariana. I abandoned my own life. His eyes drifted across the room. I abandoned this house. The people inside it. My responsibilities. He slowly folded Naomi's letter. That failure belongs to me. No excuses. No denial. Only truth. The room became perfectly still. Security entered moments later. Victor looked toward Ariana. This was you. She answered softly. No. This was already there. She glanced toward the boxes of evidence. I only encouraged someone to look. Victor was escorted from Brooks Manor without another word. The front doors closed behind him. No applause followed. Justice rarely needed celebration. Only silence. Weeks passed. Spring gradually replaced the last traces of winter. Every morning, Isaiah continued therapy. Some days he improved. Some days he didn't. But he no longer measured healing by the distance he could walk. He measured it by the distance he had returned to living. The library once again filled with music every evening. The frightened kitchen assistant smiled without fear. The staff spoke freely. Fresh flowers returned to every hallway. Naomi's favorite white lilies stood beside her portrait. One bright Saturday afternoon, Isaiah asked Malcolm to wheel him into the gardens. Not because someone challenged him, because he wanted to be there. Children from the hospital foundation arrived for a charity picnic Naomi had dreamed of years earlier. Laughter drifted across the lawn. The same golden retriever puppy raced happily between picnic tables, still convinced every stranger was already a friend. Ariana watched from beneath an old oak tree. She smiled as Isaiah accepted a small paper cup of lemonade from a little girl. The child looked at his wheelchair, then simply asked, "Would you like to play cards with us?" Isaiah smiled. "A real one. I'd like that very much." No one stared at the wheelchair. No one whispered about the Mafia boss. To those children, he was simply another person sitting beneath the sunshine. Ariana quietly prepared to leave Brooks Manor a few days later. Her work there was finished. Isaiah met her at the front entrance. "I can't repay what you've done." She smiled. "You already have." "I have." "You opened the curtains." He looked back toward the mansion. Every window reflected the afternoon light. For the first time in years, not a single curtain was closed. Isaiah extended his hand. She took it. No speeches, no dramatic promises, just gratitude. As Ariana walked down the long stone path, she never looked back. She didn't need to. Behind her, Brooks Manor no longer felt like a fortress built around grief. It felt like a home learning how to breathe again. And somewhere beyond the silence that had once imprisoned every room, Naomi's favorite melody floated softly through the open windows. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because love had finally become stronger than it. And that day, everyone who entered Brooks Manor remembered something no amount of power could ever purchase. What dignity, forgiveness, and hope truly look like.